I think most people assume that the war itself is the hardest part, but getting back to normal after you get back is a lot harder. I was stationed with a unit in Fort Hood, and let's just say it wasn't the best unit. And so we just had a lot of drama. The command climate wasn't the best. A lot of boundary issues, a lot of legal issues with forged college transcripts to get people promoted kind of stuff, people running businesses with those kinds of things. We had a bit of a prostitution problem for a while. We had pornography problem for a while on government computers. It was just a lot of stuff. Always something going on. And coming back into regular life, I was very much over this unit that I was with. And I was looking forward to finishing out my time in the military. When I first signed up in Michigan, it was only for 5 years. So I was kind of already mapping out my final time in the Army as I was wrapping up my time in Iraq. But things weren't looking too good. Now, in this period of time, we were going to Iraq or Afghanistan just constantly. The United States Army, well, all the branches of the military were just in constant deployment. It was a very difficult thing to keep going. It was a very difficult thing to meet the needs for this constant conflict. And so I could kind of see I was going to get back and I was going to have a certain amount of time. And I already knew, even when I was in Iraq, closing out my final few weeks, I was like, man, I'm going to get home. And that's just a couple of months too long. They're going to slap me into another unit that's about to go back to war so they can squeeze another year out of me. And I knew that was a very real possibility. There was this sort of procedural thing that the Army would do called stop loss. And what that meant is, even though you had that contracted term of service negotiated when you first signed up, the Army, of course, in times of war, reserved the right to extend that contract to us within certain limits and certain periods of time. And I mentioned that first night back that I didn't sleep very well, and that continued. I wasn't really sure what this was. These feelings of fear, being hyper vigilant, with people slamming doors or being kids and maybe yelling out at a restaurant or a shop. It was setting me off, and it was just, I was walking around just constantly having like jump scares all the time. And another thing that kind of plagued me was it felt like my memory was going. It felt like my mind was slipping away. And I didn't know what was going on. It was a part of everything that was happening that I just wasn't quite sure what was happening. And I was a little freaked out, but I didn't know what to do, so I just didn't do anything. And I first noticed it near the end of my tour in Iraq as I was taking my MBA courses. I was going after my master's in business administration. And I would, take my textbooks with me on missions, be going on patrol or escorting vehicles. And at night, whenever we're catching some sleep, I'd kind of whip out my headlamp and do my reading. I was having a hard time remembering what I read. I'd had my bell rung a few times in a variety of circumstances, let's just say. And I never lost consciousness, luckily, with the concussions. It was never severe enough that the medics needed to send me back with an actual injury. They would kind of just ask you if I was, they'd do the tests if you're alert and aware, and I'd be able to kind of focus and I'm fine, and they'd let me go back. But it had happened a few times, and unbeknownst to me, I didn't know that it would have long-term effects. But I first started noticing that I couldn't remember what I was reading. As soon as I would turn away from it, it would all just pour out of me like water through a sieve. I don't know what happened. It was just gone. I couldn't put it back together. So I'd have to read it again, and then I'd have to read it again, and I just wasn't sure what was happening. And so in those few weeks of me trying to get back to normal, getting my possessions, getting my apartment, all this was going on in my head. It was a very lonely time in those first few months of getting back. And I was single, so it was easy for me to kind of retreat to my apartment and just not really deal with it. I didn't have a huge amount of friends, especially as a single soldier. I was too old. At this time, I was just about to get promoted to E6, a staff sergeant, and I didn't want to just hang out with the junior enlisted privates and specialists as they're out there doing their freewheeling and drinking. And I wasn't supposed to either from a fraternization standpoint. So it was tremendously isolating. And I actually turned to video games as a bit of an escape. I would play these online games that you would just play for hours. And for me, it was just a way to relax and get away from things. So as that little bit of time progressed, I did get promoted. And just as I was starting to call people up and kind of plan for my life after the military, I got stop-lossed. And I was told, yeah, they're looking at shuttling people over into some of the units they're about to kick over. And that was going to put me in past my exit date. I had been kind of ticking down the days and kind of making plans for when I was going to get out. That was what I was kind of holding on to. And when I realized that I wasn't going to be able to escape, it was a bit of a body blow, and it exacerbated the depression that was already there, and it just started me on a bit of a downward spiral. Now, I had made E6, I had made staff sergeant, and one of the things that you had to do when you made that rank, just like the rank before it when I had made sergeant, was you had to go to school. You had to go to school to learn how to be a sergeant, and you had to go to school to learn how to be a staff sergeant because it comes with new duties and responsibilities. The first half is Army kind of skills, general Army kind of leadership skills, and the second half is how to be an E6 in your career field. So for me, it was going back to Fort Meade, which was where I went to learn to be a journalist, and it was at a joint service communication school called the Defense Information School. And I remember getting there, and my career field is pretty small. So I knew a couple of the people that were in my class for this part of the non-commissioned officer course that I was in. And I was in a really dark place. The depression had set in, the dreams had set in. I wasn't sleeping. I was having just nightmares about what I had seen overseas. I was suicidal. That wasn't the route I wanted to go, even though it was constantly in my head to do it. I didn't want to do that. I knew that it was an affront to my faith. I knew that kind of going out on my own terms wasn't what God wanted for me. He had kept me alive for a reason, all of that kind of stuff, which helped but didn't, because then I just felt guilty for having the thoughts of suicide. And it's not like I was wanting to have these thoughts. Again, I was just this jumble of feelings and this bit of a mess. And I was agitated and moody and depressed. And it was an amplification of what had been there since I was a teenager, now with all this new craziness thrown into the mix. I was on edge. I had manifested this weird aversion to physical touch, where it just made me uncomfortable when people touched me. And I would try to just give people hugs or something like that to try to just get through it, but it just really put me on edge. And so I was just in this terrible headspace. The classmates that I had in this basic non-commissioned officer course, especially the couple of guys who knew me, they saw that I was just kind of not myself. And I was still showing up. I was still laughing it up and spending time with them on our time off. I was like a high-functioning depressive, right? I was putting on the show, and there were several of my classmates who were actually instructors, in our case across the street, at that Defense Information School, where the junior enlisted were being taught how to be journalists. They also taught broadcasters and actual photographers and the photojournalists like myself and illustrators. There was a bunch of different jobs that all the branches sent their people to that schoolhouse to learn how to do those jobs. It was a pretty expansive building, as you would expect, right? It was a joint service kind of thing. Several of my classmates were instructors there, and they talked about it. It seemed neat. They were like, yeah, we teach. And I remember hearing about it, and again, I was kind of sullen and putting on a good show, but still kind of detached. And so during this non-commissioned officer course, the senior non-commissioned officer who was kind of in charge of all of our orders We called him our branch manager. He was kind of HR for our career field, our job category in the Army. He was the one that would write orders and assign people out and make sure that all of the slots all over the world were filled. And so you want to get to know this guy because he could send you to Korea, or he could send you to Hawaii, he could send you to Washington State, he could send you to Iraq. I mean, he had to manage the needs of the Army for this career field, for my journalist career field. And he came to visit us in the course of our non-commissioned officer class, our weeks that we had there. And so he was meeting with us individually, just asking what our next steps were, or where we saw ourselves in the Army, and that kind of thing. And it came time for me to meet with him. He would meet with us individually over the course of a couple of days. He knew that I'd come back from Iraq recently. He'd ask him how I was doing. Of course, I was like, Master Sergeant, I'm doing fine. He was asking kind of what I wanted to get out of the Army, and I didn't lie to him. I was just talking about, Master Sergeant, I'll probably get out. There's a lot going on right now at Fort Hood. I'm not sure. I've been stop-lost. I'm not exactly sure what's going to happen. So I'm just here to do my duty, Master Sergeant. Kind of stuff. Now, a couple of weeks later, even as my class was starting to draw to a close, there was somebody who came in while we were on break, or while we were working on a group project or something. There was a non-commissioned officer who came in, and she was from across the street at this joint service schoolhouse that some of my classmates where they served. And she was looking for me, and I was just there kind of working. I looked up, like, I'm here to see Staff Sergeant Salmons. And I was like, well, Roger, here I am. And she said, I've been assigned to be kind of your mentor, your onboarding buddy, battle buddy, because you're going to come. You've been assigned to the schoolhouse across the street. You see, my classmates, they knew I wasn't doing very well, and they, a lot of them went to go talk to my branch manager, and they said that this guy is a good soldier, and he's just going through a lot, and he could use a break. And that branch manager put the paperwork through, got the nomination process, unbeknownst to me, got the nomination process within a matter of weeks, a couple of weeks, and got me approved. You see, it was a joint service school, and so it took a little bit of blessing from certain people for that school to bring on instructors. It took some character witnesses. I think it took a couple letters of recommendation, and my classmates, a few of them, they saved my life, because I don't think I would have made it at Fort Hood, stop lost, sent back to war again. I really think they saved my life, and it's a big deal to me, obviously. So I felt like I had won the lottery in a way. I got back to Fort Hood after I had graduated from that non-commissioned officer course, and by then the orders had hit, and even my command at Fort Hood knew what was going on. And it's not like they were mad, oh, you outsmarted us, but it was like walking in and being able to quit your job, right? Like, hey guys, I'm out of here, peace. And I was able to pack up and move to DC, and I ended up moving in with one of my classmates from that course, he and his girlfriend. I had to extend beyond my 5 years, but it was this wonderful blessing through those classmates and through that branch manager and God, that I could extend on my own terms. And so I knew that I was going to be able to spend the rest of my time in uniform at this assignment. And it was really neat. It was life-changing. And those next 3 years were something else. Now, I probably lived 10-15 years in those 3 years, and we're not gonna have time to get into all that stuff. A lot of wild living, going out, nightlife, bars, clubs. It was DC, so I mean, there was always something going on. Met a lot of great people through my roommates, people that I'm still friends with, and it was this life-giving group that helped me in this really broken state. Now, things didn't magically just get better, and in fact, for the first year or so while I was in DC, I leaned, I think, a little too heavily on just the drinking and the partying, and I wasn't getting into drugs this time. But it was covering over what was going on. And my decision to get help, it wasn't an immediate one, but there were a couple of episodes where I kind of said to myself, like, man, this isn't cool. And something's got to give, you know. There was one. I'll tell you one story. I was on a kickball league in DC, which was really neat. It was kind of a young professionals networking kind of situation. You would go and play, elementary school kickball on the mall, in the shadow of the Washington Monument. It was just this really cool thing, and you're there just playing kickball for 30-40 minutes, and then you would go to a bar and you drink for the next 5-6 hours. It all comes out in the wash from a physical fitness standpoint. And I tell the story because I'm not proud of it, but it really shows how stupid I was and how God had mercy on me, but that I don't stand in judgment of people who've gotten in trouble for this kind of stuff, because it could have very easily been me who got in trouble for this kind of stuff. But I remember waking up to my alarm one morning, and I'd been out the night before, and I didn't remember how I got there, and it kind of spooked me. And I was dressed, or I was in my sleeping clothes under my covers, and I didn't remember that. And my wallet was there, and I walked to the balcony and I looked down and my car was parked, and I didn't remember that. And when I talked to some friends in this kickball league who I was out with, I was like, hey, what was I like last night, or what happened last night? Because I do remember being at the bar and we were doing a lot of beer drinking, but then the shots started, and then I forget. I just don't know. I just kind of blacked out. And so I wasn't sure what happened. And so I asked my friends, like, hey man, what happened? Was I okay last night? And what they said was, and it was kind of a jarring moment, they were saying like, oh man, no, we love drinking with you. You're the one that at the end of the night, you're getting people in a cab, you're making sure people remember to close out their tabs, you're walking with girls that are a little nervous to the metro stop. I mean, that's what you were doing last night. You were fine. Why? What happened? And I didn't remember it. And so that, plus a couple of other things, and just not sleeping, it really it shook me a little bit. And so I decided to get some help. And they did some tests and some questionnaires and some interviews, and I was diagnosed with PTSD. I asked about the memory stuff, and we did some scans and some tests, and they said, well, it's not as pronounced as we've seen, but you have a traumatic brain injury. Luckily, it doesn't seem like it's a severe thing, but yeah, they're like, yeah, we can see that there's some damage there, and that's what was causing even my memory problems. Like I couldn't focus, I couldn't remember things. And so I started seeing this psychiatrist. I saw him probably for about a year, and he helped me through a lot of stuff. We would record the rougher things that I had experienced on a cassette tape, and it sucked. It's like physical rehabilitation. It hurts. And so, man, I hated listening to that. I hated listening to those tapes. I hated listening to those tapes. But I would stick with it overall. And things did start to get better. And I did go to a couple churches. There were friends of mine that lived on the Virginia side of DC who would go and invited me to come a couple of times, and I went. Because people knew that I was a Christian, and we would even have conversations about things. It wasn't something that I actively was pursuing, but I would read my Bible, and I would like stream recorded podcasts and stuff like that. And although I didn't date very much, I did allow myself to flirt a bit with some women and some men, and trying to explore some aspects of that. Finally, it was hindered, unfortunately, by all the other things I was dealing with, and I had a hard time with physically touching people. I could and I couldn't. I don't know how to explain it. It was just kind of weird, and there was a lot of anxiety when it came to intimacy. So I just kind of didn't. I didn't want to fall apart and be that crazy veteran. It was a bit of a buzzkill, right? So I would flirt and play, but I wouldn't commit to the evening, if you know what I mean. But overall, my time in DC was a respite, and I attribute that a lot to just God's providence overall, of course, but just the people that were in my life. Even though it's DC, everybody's kind of coming and going from somewhere else, going to somewhere else. there was this network of just really solid people who I still love and adore and miss a great deal. Because for me, they were my refuge, they were my community, they were my church. And as I closed out my 3 years and had those friendships and relationships, I had made a name for myself in the DC area with a lot of social media type things. I was a staff sergeant. I was speaking at a lot of seminars about customer engagement and social media, and at the time it was new. So this was in the 2008, 2009, 2010 time frame, and they liked having me because I was on time, I was mildly hilarious, and I was free because I was a government employee. I couldn't take money for it, and they didn't have to, and so they were just like, hey, get that army guy. He's in uniform. People like to hear from soldiers. Let's get that guy. So I spoke at a lot of conferences in DC. Well, that led to just networking and some opportunities, and I was offered this job in San Antonio to work for this big financial institution. And so I moved down to Texas, and I started going to church again. There was a college friend and her husband and kids who lived nearby and who attended a church that was just a mile away from my apartment in San Antonio. And I started going there. And I started going there because I wanted to. I started easing back in to attending a community. But it was different this time because I didn't feel like I had to. I wasn't guilted into it. And I was happy to make it my home from a faith perspective for a while, right? For the time that it needed to take. And that brings us kind of up to speed. I've been in San Antonio off and on since 2010. I've been an active part of a faith community for the majority of that time. I recognize the function of church. I don't see it as a weight. I see it as an imperfect thing made up of imperfect things, people. They're striving to be better, more compassionate, more Christ-like. And yes, the politics and the ugliness and the religion gets in the way of Christ sometimes. But I've been lucky to find a couple of communities that I can see through the drama and the humanity of the religion of it. And I can see the spirit. And now I haven't stopped growing either. And what we're going to get into in future videos are some of the topics and the discussions that I've had in the past, or I've had recently, or am having, with the nature of just what makes up my faith. Because even though we've been on this kind of crazy roller coaster of a ride, and you may feel very distant from me in circumstance, I think you'd be surprised at how we've probably shared a lot of doubts and uncertainty in the traumas that we have experienced. Why things are the way they are, and why do they play out like that? And I don't just have a verse to just button up everything and send it on its way in just little packages. And I don't think we're supposed to. I think it's supposed to be something that you wrestle with. And that because on the other end of it, when you've lived it, it's more genuine than if you've just been plugging your ears, singing your way through it without paying attention. And so, like with every closing of these videos, a sincere thank you for being with me on this journey and letting me talk about things. I'm a person that's still incomplete. My journey is still incomplete. My thoughts and attitudes about a variety of topics are incomplete, but I just want to try to put a flag in the ground and say, this is where I kind of am. Where are you? So we can have just conversations about it and just learn about it. We'll just have to see where it goes. So thank you very much for being here, and I'll talk to you soon.